Today's daf is daf mem beis, and we'll begin with the Gemara on the second line. My kamashmalan tanina. What is the Mishnah coming to be mechadish to us with regard to a case of pitui where he pays not only the knas but also for boshes upagam, and the father collects that knas, and in the case of ones we add tsar. We already have that in the Mishnah back on Daf Lamites. The Mishnah here on Daf Lamites Amid Beis seems to be just repeating what we already know. Hamafata nosein shloshet dvar arba. Hamafata nosein boches pagam uknas. Most of the love ones nosein esetzar. We're just reviewing and repeating what we already know. And the Gemara tries a hamamina lavia itzrichle. Maybe the chiddush of our Mishnah here on Daf Lamites Amid Beis is that the father collects the knas. And the Gemara asks, that can't be, because Lavia Nami Pshita, that's also Pashut. I don't need another Mishnah. There's no Havamina that the father is the one who collects the knas, as opposed to the Naira herself. That's Pashut. The Kayov Mefata, we're talking about a case of Pitui as well. And in the case of Pitui, there's a built-in Mechila because she consented to the Maisabiyah. And Iliatzma, by process of elimination, I'll be able to prove to you that it's the father who pockets the knas. Because if the balabas over the knas were her, the Nara herself, then Midaita, Amayov Mufata, Midaita of it, she agreed and consented to this Maisabiyah. That's a built-in Mechila. And therefore, I have no Havamina that she would collect the knas. It must be, by definition, as the Torah says, that in the case of Pitui, there's a knas that is paid and collected, that it must be the father. The Gemara answers, Amda b'din itzrichle. The chiddush of this Mishnah is that if there was hamada b'din, which means the father during his lifetime already sued for knas, and the Bezdin Paskin, they handed down a verdict that the ma'anes, the mafat, has to pay knas. And that is a segue into the machlokes between the Rabbanon, the Plukta Rabbanon, Rabbi Shimon Rabbanon. The main subject of today's daf is going to be Rabbi Shimon, but let's just review on a very simple level the machlokes between Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanon. The issue at stake is, at what point in time does knas turn into mammon? And the obvious nafkamina would be moda b'knas pot. According to the Chachamim, once there was hamada b'din, and the Tovea brought the nitva to Bezdin, and Bezdin already issued their final verdict in favor of the Tovea and being mechayiv the nitva. At that point, according to the Chachamim Shita, the knas converts to mammon. It's a simple, straightforward chiyuv mammon, like the case of a malv and a lov. Bezdin paskins that the lov has to pay the malv because he indeed borrowed the money. That's called mammon. That's not knas. And so too in the case of knas, once Bezdin paskin that is a chiyuv, it becomes a full-fledged chiyuv. That's the sheet of the Chacham. So that therefore, in our case of Onus Umefata, if the father was able during his lifetime to be Tovea the Ma'anes or the Mefata, and Bezdin issued their psak, then that money is, if we could use the proverbial phrase, is in the bank as far as the father is concerned. If he dies subsequently, then that money accrues to his heirs, which are her brothers, his sons. However, Rabbi Shimon disagrees. Rabbi Shimon holds that the point in which the mammon, the knas, is upgraded to the status of mammon is only after gvir, only after the money was actually collected. So therefore, according to Rabbi Shimon, if the father died after the Hamad B'din, but before the actual Gvir, and he hadn't yet collected that Knas, which Bezdin Paskin that the Ma'anis and Fat has to pay him, then if he dies, at this point, the Knas accrues to the Bas, to the Nara self. And if you remember, we compared it to the case of Bogra. And therefore, that money will not be inherited by the heirs of the father. The father is out of the picture, according to Reb Shimon, because it all depends on Gvir. And now what we're about to learn is an entire sugya, which is called Karban Shvua. And that sugya is going to develop this machlokas that we mentioned between the Chachamim and Rabbi Shimon. Keep in mind that a Karban Shvua is a case where, let's say, Ruvain was Tovei Shimon, and Shimon denied the claim. Then Ruvain, the Tovea, was Mashbiah Shimon. He imposed a Shvua on Shimon to the effect that if you owe me this money as I claim you do, and you deny it, then you violated Shvua. And the Torah allows what's called Mushba Mipia Cher, that a Tovea could be Mashbiah the Nitba. The Nitba says Amen, and Kolamotzi Amen Mipiv is Kilu Hu Atzmo Nishba. It's as if he took the Shvua. And if later on he does tshuva and he comes to Bezdin and he confesses that he really did owe the money and therefore his shvua was a false oath, the Torah has an entire parsha in the 5th chapter of Vayikra called Karban Shvua. And the Torah says the following: Nefesh kisechto mola mal b'Hashem v'kichesh b'mito. And then the Torah after V'kichesh gives a long list of various cases that are enumerated here in this pasuk: Pikadon, Sumas Yad, Gezel, Oshak, Motzaveda V'kichesh ba, V'nishbal Sheker, V'hoya ki yechto, when it becomes clear based on his own confession that he had sinned, V'ashem, and he's guilty. Then number one, he has to repay the money that he stole. And then Chamishaso Yosef Olav, he's got to pay an additional 20% on the top. And then he's got to bring a Karban Osham, which is an Ayel Tomim in Atzon Be'erkecha La Osham Esakon Elakon. Tanan Hossam. Now we're going to learn a Mishnah in Masechet Shavuos. And he tells you here on the side that this is on Daf Lamed Vav Amid Beis in Masechet Shavuos. On Nasta Upitita Aspiti, the father is suing for ones or pitui, for who? And the defendant Omer lo anasti v'lo pitita. He denies the claim. The father then, Mashbiach Ani, imposes a shvua on the accused, on the defendant. The Amar, and the defendant said Amen. And as we said earlier, just to review, Ha'one Amen al shvua, Hareu Kemisha Hotzi shvua Mefureshes Mipid. And that's a mission in Shvuos on Daf Chavtes. And now the man is living with the guilt. He knows that he raped this man's daughter. He's chayav and knas and boches and pagam and tar, and he took a false oath, hoda, and now he confesses. Chayav, he has to bring a karban osham. He's got to pay not only the keren, but he has to also add a chomesh. So what we do is we add the following variables. X we'll call knas. Y we'll call boshes. Z we'll call gam. We add those all together and we divide them by 5 and he adds another 5th on top. So he's going to be paying knas, boshes, gam plus another 5th, or in the case of ones, plus tzar and another 5th of that entire total payment. Rabbi Shimon Pot. Rabbi Shimon says no, you're pot. And why? She'ena mishalim knas al pi atz. Now wait a second. We have a principle called modav knas potur, and in this case there are no edim. There's no external independent evidence to prove the ones or the pitu. We only know it from his confession of the crime. The Rabbana never denied that principle. They also agree that modav knas potur. So where is the machlokas? Would the Rabbanan say that in this case he has to pay knas? That's impossible. Modav knas is potur. We don't have any evidence or any edus to testify that he was ma'anis or mafat. Amrullah, the Chacham say, Afal Pishaina Mishalim Knas al Piatz. I agree with you. Modav Knas is pot, but there are other elements here in the equation. Al Mishalim Bocha Supagam al Piatz. Why are you getting rid of Bocha Supagam over here? That's Mammon. That was not Knas. There's no Modav Knas pot on Bocha Supagam. And therefore he has to bring a carbon, but in addition to the carbon, he's going to have to pay Bosha Supagam, and on top an additional Chomesh equal to Bosha Supagam. Because when he took the Shvuah, he tried to pater himself up not only from Knas, but also from Mama. And that's enough to generate a carbon Shvuah. And in addition, to force him to pay both Keren and Chomesh. Keren here in this case is Bosha Supagam. Now, the simple pshat here in this machlokes would be the following. There was Hamada Bedin, and Bezdin Paskin that this accused, Ma'anes or Mafata, was guilty as accused. In such a case, the Knas itself should be upgraded to the status of Mama. And therefore, if he denies it, and he took a shvuah in that particular scenario, then l'chora everybody should agree as a double pashut that he's chayv a carbon shvuah plus karen v'chomesh. No longer knas because it's after Amar B'din. However, said according to Reb Shimon that Hamar B'din is not sufficient. We need Asher Nasa on the pasuk, which means there's got to be Gevir. But now we go back to the Shitas Chachamim. Oy minei abai mirabba. Omer lechavero anasto pitita esbiti vehemaraticha b'din. There was in a certain bezdin a judgment that was handed down to the effect that you have to pay the knas and all the other payments. And it's chayav. At that point, you became a chayav. He denies the entire claim. This never happened. This whole story is a fabrication. Nishma. And he took a shvuah. And then Hoda, finally, he has, pangs of consciousness, and he does tshuva, and he confesses that he took a false oath and he owes this money. He was guilty of onus and pita. Now, we said that according to Reb Shimon, in order to upgrade the status of knas to mammon, we need gvir. It's not enough to have hamar b'din. And that's what Abai wants to clarify. While it's true that after hamar b'din, which was the claim of, we'll call him Ruvain, the father of the Nara, that there was already hamar b'din, what about the parsha of Korban Shvuah? L'das Rabbi Shimon Mai. Keva de Omad Bidin, Mamona Havi, Umechayev Ale Korban Shvua, O Dilma Afal Gav the Omad Bidin Knas Havi. What Abai vacillates is on the following point. Once there was Hamada Bedin, then one thing you have to agree that L'chora Koiter of Shimon, you would have to agree that it now gets upgraded to the status of Mama. When does Rabbi Shimon require Gevia, the actual collection? That's only in determining who gets the money, who actually pockets the money, to whom does the Ma'anis Mafat have to pay that money? Is it to the father? Or is it to the Nara herself? But when you're focused on one issue and one issue only, namely, are we dealing with Mammon or are we dealing with Knas? Then even Rabbi Shimon would have to concede that with Hamada B'din, it's no longer Mammon. I'm sorry, it's no longer Knas, it's Mammon. And why? Because Modeh would be Chayav. If he confesses that there was such Hamada B'din and a verdict that was handed down in another Bezdin, he's being Modeh on a Chiyuv. A Chiyuv is Mammon, it's not Knas. So what was the tzad in Abaye's vacillation when he asked Rabbah that maybe in this case Rabbi Shimon would say there's no Korban Shvua here? This is not similar to all the cases in that enumerated list of Akichesh V'Amiso listed in the parasha of Korban Shvua. This case is unique because it's a Knas. Now, it's true that it's after Hamada B'din, and after Hamada B'din, there's no longer a possibility of Mod V'Knas Pater. So from that perspective, we certainly should classify and define it as Mama. But nevertheless, it started as Knas. And that's called Ikro Knas. And that sets up Ones Umafat as different than all the other cases that are listed in the Torah. Amalei, Rabbah says, in response to Abai's question, that which is intuitively correct, Omona Havi, Umachayvele Korban Shvua. Who cares about the fact that it was once Knas? Now it's Mama, and I'll prove it to you. If he would be Modeh that such a verdict was issued in another Bezdin, he'd have to pay out of pocket. We would not apply the principle of Modeh V'Knas Pater. So you see, it's Mammon. It's been upgraded and transformed into Mammon. And this has nothing to do with Reb Shimon's original position with regard to the fact that up until Gevir, the father doesn't have the money in the bank. And when the father dies, Reb Shimon insists that she, the Nara herself, collects the Knas. That's a different issue entirely. That's an issue of to whom is the Knas paid. So when Bezdin issued a din, a judgment, a ruling that this Ma'anis is Chayev, they didn't determine yet, according to Reb Shimon, who would collect that money. To whom does that money have to be transferred to whose bank account? That's going to be determined by Shas Gevir, an event that the father dies. But if you talk about the nature of the moment itself, it's no longer Knas after Hamada B'din, as it has already established a full-fledged chiyuv, and the proof in the pudding is that Modeh Knas would not apply over here. And if you consented, the Ma'anis consented that there was a ruling in another Bezdin, he would have to pay based on his own confession. And therefore, Rabbi Shimon would agree that once there's Hamada B'din on a Knas like Ones Umafata, back into the ballpark of Korban Shvua, with all the implications that he brings a Korban, if he took a Shvua, and now he said he took a false oath, and on top to boot, he pays the Knas and Bosha Supagam and Sar. And now we're going to have a long, somewhat tedious proof to the contrary. Abaye is now going to work very hard to prove that according to Shimon, In the parsha of Korban Shvuah, the Torah is teaching us that it all depends upon Ikra. Remember that word Ikra. If the Ikar Adavar, the Chiyuv, the Machayev as it emerged was a Knas, there's no Korban Shvuah. Now, in order to appreciate this raya that Abai is going to adduce, we need to realize that this brisa that he's going to quote is made up of two parts. As always, a Reisha and a Sefer. We're going to start with the Sefer, and we're going to see a debate between Abai and Rava and Rabbah as to how to interpret the Sefer. And then Abai is going to come with the winning march. He's going to quote the Reisha and prove from the Reisha this is the case, and therefore the Sefer has to be talking about the same case. So let's go through the brisa. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Yachal ha'omer l'chavero anasta upitisa asbiti, v'hu omer lo anasti lo pitisa. Or another case of knas. Hey mitshorcha es avdi, Yoshar killed my eved, and you have to pay shloshim shkolim. V'hu omer lo hemis, he denies the whole story. Oh, a third case of a knas. Omer lo avdo, your eved knani, he palta, eshini, esimisa, es eni. The Eved Knani is claiming that he goes free because his master knocked off a tooth or took off his arm. Hu Omer, the defendant denies the claim. Lo ipalti, lo simis, vinishma, took a false oath, ahoda, and then he admitted that he took a false oath. Yachal Yechayev, maybe you would think that the parsha of Korban Shvuah should apply. Anyone who's kofar mamon, he denies a claim, takes a shvuah to that effect, and then admits that he took a false oath. And the parsha in Vayikra Hay says he has to bring a korban osham plus a keren v'chomer. Talmud Lomar, we're going to go back to the parsha of Korban Shvuah, which opens with the words v'kichesh ba'am miso, and let's take a look at the list of possible scenarios in which there was a kasha with a shvur sheker and then a hodah, and he brings the korban. Number 1, pikodah. Number 2, tumitz yad. Number 3, gezel. Number 4, osh. Number 5, aveda. In all those cases, the Torah says if he takes a false oath and then he confesses, benimta oshem, the Torah says he brings an oshem, etc., etc. What is the common link that is true for all these cases? Ma elu miyuchadim shei mamon, af kol shei mamon, yatsu elu, to the exclusion of onus, mafata, shloshim shel eved, and shein v'yayin, shein knas. They are not listed on this enumerated list, and deliberately so, because they don't fit into the pattern of this list, the common denominator of which is they're all mamon. These are cases of knas. And therefore, when he was kofer a knas, took a shvua sheker, and now he admits it, no korban shvua. My love. Okay, now here we're going to turn to Daf Mem Beis Omid Beis.